For most of modern history, soldiers survived by finding cover. In Ukraine today, cover is what gets them killed. That single reversal explains more about this war than tanks, missiles, or troop numbers ever could. Because once drones control the air just meters above the ground, walls stop protecting. Forests stop hiding. Even staying still becomes dangerous. I am not talking about one new weapon. I am talking about the collapse of an entire battlefield logic. When constant aerial observation fixes your position in real time, movement becomes a signal, shelter becomes a target, and safety disappears by design. Houses, trenches, and trees no longer delay death, they schedule it. This is why modern wars are no longer decided by who has more forces, but by who sees first and strikes faster. If you want to understand where warfare is going next, stay with me. Because to grasp the future, you first have to understand how this system took control. To understand why this shift matters, we need to strip away old assumptions. For decades, warfare was organized around space, front lines, rear areas, safe zones. You advanced, you paused, you regrouped. Movement was risky, but still manageable. Cover bought time. Distance bought safety. That framework is now breaking down. In the environment you are looking at, there is no meaningful separation between observation and attack. A drone sees, data moves instantly, and a strike follows within seconds. What once unfolded in stages has collapsed into a single, continuous action. This changes what matters on the battlefield. Not mass, but visibility. Not armor, but detection. Not how much ground you hold, but how long you can remain unseen while occupying it. When every position can be watched and every movement logged, traditional advantages lose their weight. The real question, then, is not who is advancing or retreating. It is how this battlefield came to be redesigned in the first place. This battlefield did not change overnight. It emerged from a slow collision between technology, cost, and time. For years, surveillance from the air existed, but it was limited, expensive platforms, delayed intelligence, and long response chains. Observation and attack were separated by minutes, sometimes hours. That gap was where soldiers survived. What changed was not just capability, but scale. Cheap reconnaissance drones multiplied. Real-time video became routine. And FPV systems closed the final distance between seeing and striking. Once these elements merged, the battlefield entered a new cycle. Detection no longer triggered a process, it triggered an outcome. This is how time itself was compressed. A position that felt safe in the morning could be erased before nightfall. A short movement between cover points became a fatal decision. The logic of patience, wait, watch, then act, was replaced by constant exposure under an unblinking sky. And when time collapses like this, mistakes stop being corrected, they are punished immediately. That is why the first real crisis did not begin with a major offensive, but with something far more subtle. The first real crisis appeared quietly, not with a breakthrough, but with the disappearance of safety. Russian soldiers moved into damaged houses, basements, and abandoned buildings for the same reason armies always have. Walls meant protection. Roofs meant concealment. Stillness meant survival. That logic failed the moment drones began watching every street and courtyard in real time. Once movement was detected inside a structure, the building stopped being shelter and became a coordinate, a fixed point, a marked object on a digital map. What followed was fast and precise. FPV drones flew low, entered through windows or broken roofs, and detonated exactly where protection was supposed to exist. These strikes did more than destroy positions. They erased rest areas, command nodes, and firing points in a single motion. And they sent a message across the front: staying put was no longer safer than moving. From that moment on, time worked differently. A place that felt secure could become lethal within minutes. And that pressure did not remain confined to buildings. It spread outward into movement itself. What looks like chaos on the surface is, in fact, a system working exactly as designed. FPV drone warfare is not about hunting individual soldiers. It is about controlling behavior. When observation, decision, and attack are fused into a single loop, the battlefield stops responding to force and starts responding to visibility. Every structure that hides people also fixes their location once it is observed. Every pause creates a data point. Every pattern invites prediction. Walls and roofs no longer absorb danger, they concentrate it. The moment activity is confirmed, the system responds with speed, not hesitation. This is why cheap drones matter more than expensive weapons. They remove uncertainty. Live video allows operators to wait, confirm, and strike only when success is guaranteed. The ground unit never sees the full system. It only feels the pressure. Over time, that pressure reshapes choices. Units move more often, rest less, coordinate poorly. The battlefield is not won by destroying everything at once, but by denying the enemy a safe rhythm. And once movement itself becomes dangerous, a second crisis emerges, one that spreads through forests and open ground alike. The second crisis unfolded where soldiers once felt most flexible, in movement through forests and open ground. Trees had always broken lines of sight. Short dashes between cover had always reduced exposure. Speed and terrain used to offer options. Under drone surveillance, those options vanished. Reconnaissance drones watched continuously, marking every change in position. A single moving figure stood out against a stable background. The moment motion was detected, the cycle accelerated. An FPV drone was guided in within seconds, flying low through branches or skimming above grass, adjusting its path as the target reacted. This eliminated escape. Sprinting failed because drones could correct faster than a human could change direction. Freezing failed because stopping fixed a location in open terrain. Even forests became traps, restricting movement into predictable paths that drones could patiently monitor. Distance stopped providing safety. A few meters of exposure became as dangerous as crossing an open field. What mattered was no longer where you were going, but whether the sky had already noticed you moving. And as movement turned lethal, the pressure shifted inward toward the people caught beneath it. Now imagine what this does to you, if you are the one on the ground. Every decision shrinks. Every option carries risk. Staying still invites detection. Moving invites attack. Rest becomes rare. Sleep becomes shallow. The body is present, but the mind never leaves the sky. You stop thinking in terms of objectives and start thinking in seconds. How long have I been here? Did that sound change? Did something just pause above the trees? Fear is no longer tied to explosions, but to silence, because silence often means observation. This constant pressure wears units down without a decisive battle. Fatigue builds. Coordination slips. Small mistakes multiply. You move less, you talk less, you trust less. Morale erodes, not from losses alone, but from the sense that there is nowhere safe to recover. If you have ever wondered how armies break before they collapse, this is how it happens. Not all at once, but slowly, systematically. If this perspective helps you see the human cost behind the footage, stay with me. Because the consequences do not stop with the soldier, they spread far beyond the front line. The pressure does not end with infantry. It spreads outward and upward, reshaping the war as a whole. When drones dominate close-range airspace, logistics stops being a support function and becomes a frontline vulnerability. Ammunition caches, supply routes, and resupply vehicles are watched, tracked, and struck as part of the same system that hunts movement on the ground. A single destroyed ammo store does more than remove supplies. It breaks the ability to hold terrain. Units without ammunition cannot delay advances, support neighbors, or recover after contact. And once a cache is destroyed, every replacement attempt becomes another target, moving along routes already mapped from the air. This creates a chain reaction. Positions collapse not because they are overrun, but because they are isolated. Roads turn into kill corridors. Night loses its protective role as thermal sensors erase darkness. What once sat behind the front line is pulled directly into it. At this point, the battlefield stops being local. Control of low-altitude air begins to shape regional outcomes, alliances, and planning far beyond a single town. And that raises the final question. If this system continues, what kind of future does it produce? If this system continues to spread, the future of warfare fractures into three possible paths. The first is adaptation. Armies learn to deny detection rather than absorb fire. They invest in concealment that blocks sensors, not just fragments. Movement becomes rarer, shorter, and more unpredictable. Survival improves, but only at high cost and constant strain. The second path is stagnation. Neither side fully adapts, and battles slow into grinding contests where pressure replaces maneuver. Positions change hands, not through breakthroughs, but through exhaustion. Territory becomes less important than endurance under surveillance. Wars last longer, consume more resources, and produce fewer decisive moments. The third path is escalation. Control of close-range airspace becomes the central objective. Drone numbers multiply. Counter-drone systems spread. The sky fills with sensors, jammers, and autonomous strike platforms. At that point, ground forces become increasingly secondary present, but constrained by a system they do not control. None of these futures restores the old battlefield logic. Once visibility dominates, there is no return to cover as safety. Which path emerges will depend on who learns fastest and who fails to adapt at all. And that brings us to the final insight. What this battlefield ultimately reveals is not a new weapon, but a new hierarchy of power. When control of low-altitude air decides when soldiers can move, rest, or resupply, war is no longer shaped primarily by force. It is shaped by permission. Permission to move, permission to hide, permission to survive another hour. This is why armor thickness, troop numbers, and even bravery matter less than they once did. The decisive factor is whether a system allows you to exist unseen. Without that, every action becomes reactive, every plan fragile, every position temporary. War turns into a continuous test of exposure rather than strength. Pokrovsk is not an exception. It is a preview. The lesson is already spreading beyond Ukraine into how future conflicts will be planned, fought, and judged. The side that controls the air close to the ground controls the rhythm of the war below it. If this analysis changed how you see modern warfare, don't let it end here. Share it, question old assumptions, and stay with me because the next war will be decided long before the first shot is fired.